Welcome to the Flightcast, a place where opinions aren't right or wrong, and where we can agree or disagree about movies, TV, and other assorted media because it's all subjective. My name is Ray. Thank you so much for joining me. Hopefully, if you live in the Midwest or somewhere on the East Coast of the United States of America, you're surviving this Arctic temperatures. All the Hoth-like cold that we've been dealing with this particular week, in addition to the world crumbling around us. But you know what? That's more serious political stuff that we don't need to get into. Today, no, we just have to talk about a particular franchise. A franchise that has been on several different ends of the spectrum for me and for many of you as well. Yes, as the title of this episode would indicate, we need to talk about the MCU. Because, my goodness, some discussions, I think, need to be had with respect to what is going on with the franchise and how fans are reacting to it, and maybe calling attention to some things that a number of us, myself included, have said over the last couple of years that we kind of saw where this was heading a while back. But before getting into all of that and what is going to be a Marvel heavy episode, yes, I know there are not that many of those on this particular show, with me being a priority DC fan, but before diving into this Marvel heavy episode, definitely want to remind you, especially if you are a new listener, that you can find this show and my other shows at theflightcast.com or wherever you get your podcasts, whether it's Apple Podcasts or on the Flightcast YouTube page, which is where all of my podcast episodes are posted now. Just go search the Flightcast on YouTube, hit like and subscribe on anything that you like over there as well. And also on both Spotify and Pandora. Yes, you can find the Flightcast just about anywhere you get your podcast. And if you want to use the Overcast app like I use from time to time as well as a podcatcher, you can find it there too. That's where you can find this show. That's where you can find Flight Review for my movie reviews. And that's also where you can find Flight Chat, which stay tuned for the next episode of Flight Chat. Feedback has been coming in hot and heavy over the last week, and there is still time because I will be recording it and posting it this upcoming Sunday, which is the 23rd? Yes, February 23rd. That's right. So you've got until then. It will say till Saturday. How about till Saturday the 22nd? Send those in. Sunday the 23rd is when I will be recording my next Flight Chat episode for all of our listener feedback, if you will. So you can find everything there at theflightcast.com or any of those other places I mentioned, Apple Podcast, YouTube. I was about to say Stitcher. No, not Stitcher anymore, but Pandora and Spotify, yes, is where all of them are located. Also want to take a moment to thank all of the very loyal supporters of patreon.com/theflightcast. I did record a Flight Speed episode on the way home from work yesterday that is actually touching on a decent amount of what I'm going to touch on here. And also for those of you who are subscribers to patreon.com/theflightcast, stay tuned tomorrow because I mentioned that I re-adjudicated my MCU ranking list. I did. I said I was going to do it for the last couple of years and didn't really sit down and actually dive right into it. But I did the other day after seeing Captain America Brave New World. I have a whole new ranking system for the MCU. All 35 films ranked in order. I will go down the list and post that at patreon.com/theflightcast as a special Flight Chat episode, if you will. So if you are a subscriber at patreon.com/theflightcast, stay tuned for that. That is forthcoming within the next day or so, probably either tomorrow or Friday, more than likely for sure. And maybe even a new episode of Friday Flight as well. But thank you so much to those of you who have subscribed to patreon.com/theflightcast. I am always humbled by your support, and those of you that still maintain your subscription despite my woeful efforts to maintain a consistent posting schedule that I am still working on. It is a work in progress indeed. But thank you so much for your support. I greatly, greatly appreciate it. All right, people, let's get into it. It's going to be one of those types of episodes. I've done this before. If you go down the list of Flightcast episodes, there are plenty of we need to talk about episodes. We need to talk about Superman. We need to talk about the DC fandom a couple of times, actually. We need to talk about streaming. We need to talk about box office. We need to talk about the Oscars. And today, for the first time ever, we need to talk about the MCU. And let me start off by saying this, because this is all in the wake of response to Captain America Brave New World. And as I peruse the hell site that is known as Rotten Tomatoes, a site that means absolutely nothing to me as far as my appraisal of movies, TV, and other assorted media. But I know it means a great deal to a good amount of Marvel Cinematic Universe fans. And I see a franchise that, after such an impeccable streak of fresh movies, certified fresh films, and Marvel could do no wrong with respect to the content that it puts out, I see more than a few rotten blotches over the last couple of phases for the Marvel Cinematic Universe. I see Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania rotten. That's after Eternals was rotten. I see a Marvel's film that, even though it was fresh by both the critics and the audience, did not do well at the box office. And now I see yet another rotten score from the critics for Captain America: Brave New World, despite the audience having a fresh popcorn meter. That's what they're calling it now on this hell site. A popcorn meter, if you will, for this particular film. I go to social media, particularly BLUESKY, and I see defensive attitudes from Marvel Cinematic Universe fans who enjoyed Captain America: Brave New World and are part of that 80% fresh popcorn meter saying, I liked the movie, screw all of you, da-da-da-da. I see those attitudes all over social media right now. People defending the MCU, people talking about how it hasn't lost its luster, people addressing the concerns and the complaints that are being raised in massive threads on Reddit, like the one that I just found earlier today that apparently details all of the last-second changes that were allegedly made to Captain America: Brave New World, how whole actors like Rosa Salazar were allegedly removed from the film, what the design of the leader was going to look like initially, and how things were originally going to be written, and how many rewrites happened, and how many days of reshoots there were, and how this process continues to befall the Marvel Cinematic Universe. I see the critics lambasting it, calling it overstuffed and boring, and how Captain America is a sidekick in his own film and not really the main character because the film wasn't designed for him. All manner of criticism levied at the MCU that just adds to the critical nature that has been thrust upon it, if you will, for at least the last year and a half, going on 2 years to this point. And I gotta tell you, as a DCEU fan, I offer these words to any suffering MCU fans out there that may be hurting a little bit right now with this defensive posture that you've had to adopt, or that you felt you've had to adopt over the last year or so, since your vaunted gold standard franchise is no longer considered that by the critics. Some words of wisdom that you may find familiar pop into my head. As a DCEU fan, I know what it's like to lose. To feel so desperately that you're right, yet to fail nonetheless. It's frightening. Turns the legs to jelly. I ask you, to what end? Dread it, run from it. Destiny arrives all the same. And now it's here. Or should I say, I am. Those, of course, are not my original words. No, those are the words spoken by the great Titan Thanos in his haunting and harrowing opening monologue to one of the top-tier MCU films, Avengers: Infinity War. But as haunting and as harrowing as those words, as chilling as that scene is to begin one of the more epic films in this vaunted franchise, those words do ring pretty true right now with respect to the MCU fandom, because we warned you that this was going to happen. We told you, as you were sitting pretty, riding atop your gold standard praise from the likes of Hollywood Reporter and Variety and Collider and Comic Book Resources and Screen Rant and everywhere else that absolutely kissed your ass as a fan base and said, there is nothing that Marvel can do wrong. Marvel Studios walks on water. It is the perfect franchise. There may be some blips here and there, but they are a consistent winner. DC and everyone else should bow to them and cower to their power and understand that they can't duplicate it. They can't copy it. They should go their own way, but they should still use it as a model because it is indeed the gold standard. We sat there and we took that from you people, a decent amount of MCU fans, for years, as we got dragged and thrown into the gutter for being fans of Man of Steel, Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice, and of course Zack Snyder's Justice League, the dreaded Snyder Cut. Oh yes. We know how this feels better than anyone. And we warned you, I warned you, that this was going to happen. That there would come a time where the MCU would get a little long in the tooth for the critics, a little long in the tooth for parts of the audience, and the fans alike. And this would happen. You would suffer some rotten projects, some rotten rated films, right? Because Rotten Tomatoes is your Bible, is it not? And certainly not for all MCU fans, but specifically for the ones who had the ego, the ones who told us we didn't know what we were talking about, the ones who came for us because we just wanted to enjoy our franchise in peace. Those people, we warned you that this was going to happen, that at some point the critics would turn on you. At some point the script would be flipped. And now here we have a brand new Captain America film that the critics are at best 50-50 on. There are plenty of critics that enjoy it, but not to the same height that they enjoyed Civil War, or not to the same height that they enjoyed Infinity War or Endgame or Black Panther or even Captain Marvel. No, they're real iffy on this. And they're calling once again into question, the future of the MCU franchise. Where is it going? What is it doing? Is it aimless? Why do they keep doing these last-second procedures? Why do they keep changing things? Right now, all of a sudden, the assembly line process that had literally been the backbone of this franchise almost from the beginning is now being called majorly into question because these critics don't care for it anymore. And they're not willing to lend their undying support to it anymore. And we told you so. Seriously, this is one of those cases where I said at some point this was going to happen. I waited, like many listeners of this podcast did, for the MCU fandom humbling, and it has most certainly arrived. When I see the defensive stances being thrown out there by MCU fans, people defending their enjoyment of a Captain America film, are you kidding me? That's where we're at with the MCU. They have to defend how much they enjoy that, while at the same time dragging TV projects like Secret Invasion, which I think is the worst rated MCU project like in existence at this point. You know, I didn't hear a whole lot of people talking about their enjoyment of Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania. Didn't hear a whole lot of defenders about that, to be honest with you. But all manner of 50-50 tug of war with respect to She-Hulk Attorney at Law, which I have not watched yet and need to. And that doesn't mean the MCU has not had its strength in terms of other projects that have been, rated high with both the critics and the fans. Most certainly they have. I mean, most recently Deadpool and Wolverine, absolutely. No doubt about that. And of course, Spider-Man No Way Home, and WandaVision, Ms. Marvel, like plenty of projects still succeed for the MCU. But right now there is definitely a different tone, a different discussion being had amongst the fans and amongst the critics with respect to what this franchise is doing. There were people that went into Brave New World with low expectations, not expecting much from the MCU. And when did we ever heard that before? No, we certainly didn't hear that through their vaunted freshness streak on the Hell site. That's for sure. We didn't hear about that then. And we really didn't even hear about it so much after Eternals came out, right? And, once Quantumania did what it did and all the Kang stuff and the Jonathan Majors stuff really started to ramp up, they nestled themselves and cozied up to the success of Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, which, hey, rightfully so. Fantastic film. Outstanding end to that trilogy. And then they latched onto the Marvels, but they didn't understand why the box office wasn't quite as high as they felt it should have been for how enjoyable of a movie it was to those fans in that regard, right? And then Echo kind of just passed in the night. I don't know. I still haven't watched that show. I also still haven't watched Agatha All Along. But I can't say that from what I've seen that these projects have been getting the same fanfare as WandaVision or as the previous entries in the MCU have gotten. And it's all attributed, I would say, to post-Infinity War syndrome, if you will. Because there is a level of expectation that has been set by the Marvel Cinematic Universe for its content. And it was at a subjectively high level during the Infinity Saga, most certainly. But it reached its peak. It reached its apex around the Infinity War Endgame time and definitely had like its really last hurrah with that epilogue with Spider-Man Far From Home, which was not a movie that I cared for. It's not necessarily high on my list as far as the MCU rankings are concerned. Again, I will reveal those rankings at patreon.com/theflightcast here in the next day or so. But, the Infinity Saga raised a lot of people's expectations for what this franchise is going to do. And the problem with that is how old this franchise is. Remember that the first film in the MCU was Iron Man, released in May of 2008. That was 17 years ago, guys. Almost 17 full years ago, right? More than 16 and a half years, 17 years this May. That's how long the MCU has been out. You know what that means? It means that somebody that was 10 years old when Iron Man first released in 2008, is now either already 27 or turning 27 this year, right? Got my math right on that, didn't I? Yes, pretty sure. 26 or 27 is what a 10-year-old fan of the MCU in 2008 is now. Imagine how much of a shift that is in terms of mindset, how much of a shift that is in terms of behavior. Do you think the same way at 27 that you did when you were 10? Of course not. When you were 10, Robert Downey Jr. was magic. That movie, Iron Man, was magic. You probably even enjoyed Incredible Hulk afterwards, despite the fact that Edward Norton was replaced with Mark Ruffalo later on. You had fun with Thor, whether you want to admit it or not. Maybe you thought it was a little boring, but you still liked Chris Hemsworth, and you thought Natalie Portman was cool too, right? And that dude Loki, wow, what a dick. But man, he was real fun on screen. Captain America was old, right? But still it had Agent Smith as Red Skull, as the villain, right? But it all led and culminated in that Avengers film in 2012, and that was the big, grand and glorious masterpiece from now vilified, understandably, director Joss Whedon. But at any rate, that was the apex, right? That was the rise, the beginning of the rise of the MCU, and from that point on, it was like, hey, $1 billion is easy. $1 billion for Iron Man 3, even though people were still allegedly so upset about the Mandarin twist. Thor: The Dark World was a little slow, but hey, let's bring it back up with Captain America: The Winter Soldier, and let's continue on. Wait a minute, what's this Guardians of the Galaxy thing? What's going on here? Oh, a talking raccoon with Chris Pratt? Yeah, sign me up for that. Smash hit right off the bat. Age of Ultron. Yeah, maybe you don't care for it a whole lot as fans. I know Anthony Dorsey certainly does not. But still, $1 billion effort for Marvel. And this is where the streak came up. This is where it started. This is where it was going. And the perception was the Marvel Cinematic Universe was the greatest thing you had ever seen in life. And then you got older. You got older and your perspectives changed. And this all kind of stems from a quote that Wally Mustafa, one of our longtime listeners, posted that I mentioned on the Patreon. I'm going to bring it up here because this was definitely something that I wanted to have a public discussion about. He found a quote, a post on Threads from an account called MJ Wrote That. And I think this is very telling. He says, quote, "The quality of the MCU hasn't really changed. You've changed. The MCU began over 17 years ago. You were younger. Your tastes were different. Now you're older, bitter, pretentious, and suddenly nothing pleases you anymore. Phase 1 wasn't great. Phase 2 had some misses, and it wasn't until Phase 3 that they truly hit their stride. But everyone remembers the Infinity Saga as an endless series of hits. That didn't happen. That's you living in nostalgia land. Hashtag MCU Threads." Now, what I find intriguing about that, first of all, the defensive posture that I've been talking about, it baked throughout that entire post. Because he's taking aim at the critics of the Marvel Cinematic Universe that have been living in what he calls nostalgia land and have just romanticized the history of the MCU, and now post-Infinity Saga are going, what the hell is wrong with the franchise? What are they doing? I can't believe how Phase 4 and Phase 5 have just been so far off the mark. I can't wait for RDJ to come back. Well, let's see if that even works out, because that's iffy. Who knows if bringing back the gang together is going to work out. The MCU needs a soft reboot, blah, 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 blah. People have been talking about that. There has been reboot chatter amongst the fans, if you will, for the MCU going forward. And who would have ever thought, that we would ever get to that point? Well, those of us longtime DCEU fans certainly thought that, but I digress. The point is, for the rest of his Threads post, he absolutely raises a valid point. Your perspective of the MCU most certainly has changed in the last 17 years. And you know what? For people that are bitter about it now, for people that are upset, for people that are overly critical, for people that are contributing to the rotten scores that these movies are now getting, yeah, maybe you are a little bitter. Or maybe it is that you are living in nostalgia land because for whatever reason, you ignored and dismissed what a lot of us told you your franchise was doing. For somebody that has seen all 35 MCU films at the theater, and I've watched most of the shows, I can tell you that there's absolutely nothing in Captain America: Brave New World, as far as I am subjectively concerned, that betrays itself with respect to Marvel Studios' process and what the MCU does. All the stuff about all the changes they made, all the rewrites, all the reshoots, That's standard operating procedure for the MCU. We heard and saw how they did that for Spider-Man Far From Home. We've heard about that for other films. What Kate Shortland said about what was going on with Black Widow. What we heard with respect to, the changes that were made with film, Black Panther Wakanda Forever, of course, and a number of other films. Like, this is part of the assembly line process. The MCU, Marvel Studios, Kevin Feige, Louis D'Esposito, and the Marvel Council, whoever's left of it, they're not doing anything differently now than they have done for the last 17 years or so. Seriously. Including filming most of this film in Georgia, right? Because they set up shop in Georgia many years ago thanks to their film incentives program. And yeah, they've just gone to town. But what is there so different about what they've done with Brave New World as opposed to what they've done in the past? Nothing, as far as I'm concerned. And that's why I consider Brave New World to be a mid-tier MCU film. It towed the line. It was right there in the middle, and it wasn't the greatest. It's not on the level of Winter Soldier as far as the highest peak, but it's certainly also not on the level of Thor: Love and Thunder, which, subjectively speaking for me, is the lowest valley. But why are people surprised about what this film does? Surprised about the production process? Why have you got to go to interviews with crew members talking about, well, this is what they do, and that's what they do? They've been doing this. This is how they operate. And that's neither good nor bad. You can treat it either way, right? I don't look at it as bad, okay? I'm one of those people that I've said for years that I'm an MCU fan, that I am a fan of Marvel Studios, and I've enjoyed all of their films. I own all of them with the exception of Captain America: Brave New World, which I will own when they release the Glorious Steelbook. They've done it so far for each of their previous entries. I will own this one again. Come on now. And it's not just because I have a wide strike zone. It's also because at this point in life, seriously, guys, I don't feel like being that bitter about shit. I really don't. Not with respect to what movies do. Because like I said in the review, I went into that movie thinking, hey, maybe they'll go this way, maybe they'll go that way. And when I discovered the direction that they were going in, I said, all right, let me readjust. Let me look at this movie for the story that it is telling, not the story that I want it to tell, not the story that I wish it told, not the directions that I wanted it to go in. One more time for the cheap seats. Damn near every fan complaint about these movies can be summed up in one sentence. They didn't do what I wanted them to do. That's it. That's the majority of fan complaints with respect to any of these films. And that goes for Marvel, that goes for DC, that goes for Star Wars, that goes for Star Trek, that goes for any long-time franchise that you can think of that has a massive fan base. They didn't do what I wanted them to do. That's it. And that's where we're at now with the MCU. There's a direction that fans want them to go in, and they are clearly not going in that direction. Now, what direction are they going in? I don't know. Could not tell you. But I will say that if you're somebody that's going to give us the revisionist history and tell us, well, the direction was clear as a whistle for the Infinity Saga, why can't they go back to what they did there? I will tell you, bullshit, it wasn't clear as a whistle. Do you remember how Thanos had several different designs over the course of however many years, from his very first appearance in the mid-credit scene in Avengers all the way to how he looked in Avengers Infinity War? He changed his look like 3 or 4 times, right? The very first Thanos design, go ahead and Google it. Go ahead and look it up. It don't look like Josh Brolin. Josh Brolin wasn't even cast. He didn't even say anything. I mean, yeah, he was purple. Yeah, he had the gold helmet on, but that was it, right? There was nothing else close to him. And then he got redesigned for Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 1, right, which is his first cameo appearance. It wasn't a setup. It was a cameo appearance. I've talked about that before as well. And they kind of stuck with that design for the mid-credit scene in Age of Ultron, where he put on the gauntlet and was like, fine, I'll do it myself. But even from that point, they changed his design and altered their plans going into Infinity War. Because again, that's what they do. That's what this franchise and this studio has done from the beginning. They pivot. They make changes. They do things in post. This franchise has lived in the phrase, we'll fix it in post, so often. And they reshoot, and they take whole portions of movies out. Come on, Infinity War. I've seen the footage. I brought this up before. I've seen the footage from Infinity War of Mark Ruffalo, like, in the, whatever, the mocap suit, that when they do the HUD vision, right? I've seen him, he's in Veronica, right? Remember, he's in the Hulkbuster armor. I've seen footage of him recording the argument / discussion, the come to Zod meeting that he and Hulk are having, where he's trying to get Hulk to finally reveal himself during the Battle of Wakanda, and Hulk busts out of the Hulkbuster armor and he's in the Battle of Wakanda instead of him still being in the Hulkbuster armor. I've seen that. That exists. That's a real thing. So why are we surprised that these last second changes and this process is still happening with Marvel Studios? This is their bread and butter. This is what they've done. And I'm certain that that was the case for even films like Spider-Man No Way Home or Deadpool and Wolverine. But we don't care about how many changes those movies made because we really like those movies. The critics really like those movies, and the box office really likes those movies. The general audience was on board with those movies, right? So we're okay with that, right? We're okay with the last second changes as long as it's certified fresh on the hell site. But the second that there's any waffling, the second that there's any dissension whatsoever, now it's a problem. That's hypocritical. Either you're in for a penny, in for a pound with respect to their process, right? You can't have it both ways. I have accepted a long time ago what Marvel's process was, and I level set my expectations appropriately. And that's why, largely, I've been able to enjoy their films and even find the good things, subjectively speaking, out of the films that I don't necessarily care for as much. It's why I don't have an issue and I have no regrets owning all of them in glorious steelbook form, because I'm a completionist. And I got to have something, for those films, I got to have at least a little something about each of them that I enjoy in order to really justify owning all of them, even if it's for completion's sake. And I do. There's stuff on the third act of Thor: Love and Thunder, I like. When everything goes black and white. I like that third act, right? Guardians Volume 2, there are some things on a secondary and tertiary watch that I do like in the film, despite me thinking it still has way too many stupid jokes, right? Even Far From Home. Far From Home is another one, similar, maybe not as strongly. I don't feel quite as strongly as I do this way with Thor: Love and Thunder, but it's another case where I like the third act. The third act is really good, in my opinion, for Spider-Man Far From Home, right? So, that's the thing, guys. It's like, we're holding Marvel Studios' feet to the fire for things that they've been doing from the beginning, and I don't understand that. Doesn't make any sense to me. Seems extremely hypocritical in that regard, to be so critical of their process because, oh no, now it's producing rotten movies on the hell site. No, this is what they've done. This is their bread and butter, and they should stick to it. It's what they know. And the other big reason that they should stick to it is very simple. The general audience still digs it. I did not have high box office expectations for Captain America Brave New World because I wasn't sure how it was going to be received, right? But, going to the hell site, it's like, and I will continue to call it the hell site because that's what Rotten Tomatoes is, the hell site. And just looking at the disparity, I said, oh, well, this will be something intriguing to observe going into the opening weekend. But I certainly did not call $192.8 million. I did not think it was going to do that well in its opening weekend. It was a pleasant surprise in that regard for this particular film. And as I look at the updated numbers now on Box Office Mojo, $204.6 million worldwide through its first 5 days of release going into today. It did another 11.1 million on President's Day. It did another 6.3 million yesterday on Tuesday, right? So, quite honestly, even though we see articles asking, well, does it have the legs? Is it going to be able to sustain? Well, it already made back its production budget. And there have been plenty of the pieces too, people asking, well, what about the marketing budget? Will it be able to cover all the costs, right? Marketing budgets. Remember how we never cared about marketing budgets until BVS? Then miraculously, oh my goodness, marketing budgets are a huge deal. It's not about making back just the production budget. You've got to make back more than that. Okay, well, it was silly then, and it's silly now. Captain America Brave New World has already made back its production budget and then some, and continues to go. And we'll see what it does in its second weekend. But right now, the general audience is telling Marvel Studios, we're good, we're cool, we like this. Not everything is going to be Avengers level. Not everything should be Winter Soldier level in that regard, right? Not all Marvel films are like that in that regard, right? Go back to that Threads post. Phase 1. Okay, now I enjoyed Phase 1, and Phase 1 is probably, if not my favorite phase, at least my second favorite phase. I think I'm somebody that really does defend Phase 4. I like Phase 4 a good deal. I liked a number of the films in Phase 4, and I like the standalone direction that they were kind of going in with a decent amount of those films after having the Infinity Saga be what it was in that regard, right? But if you go back to Phase 1, Now all of a sudden, like, well, Incredible Hulk is one of the most forgettable Marvel movies ever. Yeah, okay. It was the second one in the franchise's history. It came out a month and a half after Iron Man. Pump the brakes. And y'all still liked it, right? The Hell site says that it was fresh from both the audience and the critics, so shut up with that, all right? Stop acting like, oh my goodness, it was this forgettable piece of dreck. No, it was not, okay? Y'all didn't necessarily care for Iron Man 2. It still made money. You called Thor boring, but it still made money, but it only made like a little over $400 million. Captain America, the First Avenger, made less money than Batman Begins as far as box office is concerned, right? Still certified. And then you get to the Avengers and it makes $1.5 billion. And at that point, it's like, oh my goodness, here comes the walking on water stage, right? But you ignore Thor the Dark World because you're like, well, we don't have to think about the first two Thor movies now that Taika Waititi is here, right? You forget about how the first Ant-Man film, was a hit, but it was at $600 million. Like all this revisionist history, not everything in the MCU was a massive hit all the way through. So placing those expectations on a film like Captain America Brave New World is unfair. It is. It's unfair. And did you ever think that I would be defending the MCU in this regard? Maybe you didn't. Maybe you did. Maybe you didn't. I don't know. But the idea that we're going to treat this film the same way I see people treat Doctor Strange, or the same way I see people treat Black Panther Wakanda Forever, because I know tons of people I know do not like the fact that Black Panther was not recast. And they don't look at it from the emotional standpoint in terms of the cast and crew needing to mourn Chadwick Boseman's death. May he rest in peace. They look at it from the standpoint of the only superhero that the Marvel Studios has actually killed off is the black man, and they don't like that. And I get that perspective to a degree. I also don't think that is necessarily what they were doing, and I still believe that it was mostly in deference to Coogler and Angela Bassett and Letitia Wright and everybody else involved, Winston Duke, that, did not have a chance to mourn Chadwick's death, as they had to massively pivot from their original plans for the Black Panther sequel in that regard, right? And also, by the way, do you really believe that we're never going to see Black Panther on the big screen again? Okay, I don't care how many anti-DEI sentiments there are going forward, we will see Black Panther on the big screen again. It's going to happen at some point. So just cool your jets with respect to that. But ultimate point being, the idea that we're going to hold the MCU to this consistent standard after 17 years, not fair. The franchise has gone on for nearly 2 decades. You cannot maintain a pace like that. And again, I knew this. I'm sure a number of you knew this. This was predictable with respect to how critics react and with respect to how things were going to go. But again, the general audience largely does not care at this point. And it's not like, we call like Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania and the Marvels bombs, right? And by the Marvel standards, yes, they certainly are bombs. And by unrealistic fan standards, they certainly are bombs. But, to look at the box office of these films and say, well, they just utterly failed. They're still making more than the Sony movies, aren't they? Maybe that's a negligible question. We're splitting hairs with respect to that. But there's so many other factors with respect to, what affected the box office for both Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania and the Marvels. It's not simply just, the MCU is a tired formula and the reshoots and everything and the changes are not helping it. No, there's also timing, there's marketing, there's strikes, when the writers and the actors decide to strike because the studio heads are being assholes. That changes things. Just a tad, just a little bit. There's the streaming component. There's inflation. There's the fact that it's not nearly as cheap to go buy tickets to go see a movie with the family anymore as it used to be, right? All of the stuff that I've talked about before has played a part in that. But the general audience just told us this past opening weekend, hey, we're good. We like Brave New World. Let's see where you go from here. So all the criticisms and all of the questions being levied at the MCU right now, why? Marvel Studios certainly should not listen to that. And I'm going to remain consistent about my position on how Warner Brothers should have followed the money that they made from the first 4 films in the DCEU. Well, I'm certainly going to follow that position with Marvel Studios. As long as they still can make money, even with the big team-ups. For me, right, it was becoming clear there was a pattern where, like, okay, No Way Home made $1 billion. Deadpool and Wolverine made $1 billion. Okay, are we looking at a case where those are the only times that Marvel can make $1 billion as they do a massive team up, right? And I'm not saying Brave New World is going to make $1 billion. No, sir. I'm not saying that at all. I am saying that right now it's on track to definitely outpace the Marvels, and maybe it may even beat out Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania. And if that's the case, that's a nice deal for a franchise that is, looking to recapture some of its glory with the solo movies in this regard, right? And yeah, I have my thoughts on the film itself. No, it's not a perfect film. Like I said, it's mid-tier. But if it's enjoyable enough for the general audience, then the franchise has nothing to worry about in that regard. And yeah, they're navigating through some different times for them. Some different times for MCU fans as well. Because again, used to be the gold standard. Used to be that the MCU walked on water and could do no wrong. And now that's no longer the case. The spoiler glass has been broken. The veil has been lifted. The curtain has been, hung up, if you will, right? We see exactly what the Emperor looks like with respect to Marvel Studios. I've always known what the Emperor looks like, and so have many of you. And I've been okay with it because I said, this is what they do. I just don't want DC or other franchises to try and copy them because that's not what you should do. It shouldn't be, Hollywood being a copycat industry, they shouldn't always copycat everything, especially when it comes to these shared cinematic universes that last for this long. You shouldn't just try to copy and paste the job. But that doesn't mean Marvel Studios should change what they are doing. That's why I am still cautious about this idea of bringing RDJ back to be Doctor Doom. Part of me is concerned, and I said this from the beginning when that was announced. Part of me is concerned that the suits at Marvel Studios are going to Feige and saying, well, listen, we made a ton of money when it was, Steve Rogers and, more specifically when it was Chris Evans and when it was Robert Downey Jr. and all that group. So maybe you might want to bring them back so that we can get back to our $1 billion grosses in that regard, right? I'm concerned that there are suits at Marvel Studios that think that. And that's where their whole mindset of RDJ coming back comes from, right? The saving grace after the whole Jonathan Majors situation with Kang, fell through, right? Whether you agree with how that was handled or not. And my thing is, okay, well, if that's what you want to do, if you want to bring the old actors back into the fray, okay, we'll see how that goes. I don't know that it's necessary. I'm not sure. I mean, look at this Captain America film, right? The general audience was given a brand new Captain America. Right? Anthony Mackie was at the Daytona 500 this past Sunday and, did the whole driver start your engines deal. And he was introduced on the loudspeaker to a majority white crowd as Captain America himself. And they cheered him. They did. I didn't hear any boos. I didn't hear anything like that. He was there. He made the appearance. So the general audience has made the transition from Chris Evans, Steve Rogers to Anthony Mackie, Sam Wilson, Captain America in that regard. Whether they watch The Falcon and the Winter Soldier or not, they've made that transition. They're cool with it. They're okay with it. So now we'll see how that goes with respect to the rest of the box office performance for Brave New World. And then in a couple months, we'll see what they do with Thunderbolts, a.k.a. Marvel Suicide Squad, because that's what it is. That's what they're attempting as far as I'm concerned. We'll see how that goes. And because that's going to be a new concept, right? I mean, yes, it is bringing back characters that we've seen from different projects. Yes, Bucky is in it. Yes, Yelena is in it. Yes, Red Guardian's in it. Yes, U.S. Agent is in it. Yes, Julia Louis-Dreyfus finally gets to have some extended time as Valentina DeFontaine as opposed to these cameos that she's been popping up with in different films over the last 2 phases of the MCU. Yes, for sure. But it's going to be a brand new situation, a brand new grouping, if you will, right? Taking bit characters from the previous phases, bit villains and antagonists from the previous phases, throwing them into a mixing pot and trying to do the Suicide Squad thing with it. We'll see how that goes. That's going to be a new project for the general audience to adapt to, if you will. And then, of course, Fantastic Four First Steps in July, late July. We'll see how that goes because that's a new cast. That's a period piece, right? That's a retro future piece. We'll see how the general audience responds to that because it's been a decent amount of time between Fan Four Stick and this, and how many people even remember that Chris Evans was Johnny Storm at this point as far as the general audience is concerned. If that many of them believed that he was going to be still Cap in Deadpool and Wolverine while I'm sitting there knowing full well he was going to be Johnny Storm, it did not surprise me when he said flame on, right? Because, I mean, I'm a fan of Fox X-Men, but if that many people didn't remember that he was Johnny Storm, if that many people are that disconnected from Jessica Alba's Sue Storm, the Invisible Woman, and Owen Grufford's Mr. Fantastic, and Michael Chiklis's The Thing, right? Then we're talking about a brand new audience, a brand new perspective for the general audience with respect to the Fantastic Four. So we've got a new direction. We've got some new things, new-ish things for the MCU this year to see how the general audience reacts to it. And that's what Marvel Studios most certainly should follow, the general audience reaction. Because you know how we fans are. You know what we're going to do. We have our expectations, and we have our beliefs, and we have our stubborn thoughts about where we think they should go. We thought about it for Brave New World, right? And that's where a lot of these discussions and disagreements are happening, because they didn't do what certain fans wanted them to do with respect to Brave New World, and it's causing the strife, if you will, the stress that fans are putting on themselves. They didn't do what they wanted them to do, right? And it's going to be the same for Thunderbolts, right? Because there are going to be Elena fans of Florence Pugh that want her to do a particular thing, and it's not going to go the way that they want, potentially. Same with U.S. Agent. Same with Red Guardian, Ghost, Taskmaster. I mean, listen, there are Marvel fans that still hate what they did with Taskmaster in Black Widow. I don't have that kind of connection to Taskmaster, so didn't hit me like that at all. So that's why I still liked that's one of the reasons why I still liked Black Widow. I mean, I enjoyed the movie, certainly. It is a wonderful knockoff of Captain America the Winter Soldier, and I do not say that mean-spiritedly. I mean literally. It lifts the structure from Captain America the Winter Soldier and turns it into a story about Natasha Romanoff and her sister and the Red Room and all that, right? No, it's a cool movie, but that's the thing. Fan expectations are a bitch. And if you don't manage them properly, then you are going to find yourself bitter, pretentious, and suddenly nothing pleases you anymore as you get older. That's not how I wish to be whatsoever. And you know what? I'll live in nostalgia land all I like, but I'm not going to, be blind to what's been going on this entire time. I know what the MCU process has been. I've talked about what the MCU process has been. As far as I'm concerned, they haven't changed any of their process. They're still staying true to their original intent. And I saw nothing in Brave New World that changed that for me. So my expectations are set, and I go with whatever story, whatever direction the creatives have put forth for us to consume. You don't have to like it, but just understand that the reason you don't like it is because they didn't do what you wanted them to do. Not because they did anything wrong, not because they shouldn't have had reshoots for the 24 days, not because they shouldn't have rewritten the script, not because they shouldn't have done this or that or whatever. I mean, you can feel that way, but it just boils down to they didn't do what you wanted them to do. The MCU is fine. For now, it is. It's fine, right? As far as the general audience is concerned, Captain America Brave New World, aces. They enjoy it. Monetarily, they enjoy it, and any of them that voted on the Hell site enjoy it. That's what Marvel Studios should follow, not the fans. If I say that studios shouldn't follow fans elsewhere, I'm going to say Marvel Studios shouldn't follow fans either. Especially when it comes to the fact that the MCU, being nearly 17 years old now, has its own lore and its own history as far as its own Earth to build on. Isn't it officially 616? Right? Aren't they officially calling it 616? I don't know. However, they have changed that. But the point is, it's its own lore. So when they make changes to certain characters like they did in Brave New World, it's based on MCU lore, not on comic lore. You're going to have to accept that. Or you don't have to accept that, actually. You can just continue to be stubborn and act like, well, they've ruined this character or they've ruined that character, when in reality, they've just stayed true to their own process. They've stayed true to their own franchise and their own mythology that, once again, they have been building for the better part of the last 20 years, right? Close to 20 years in that regard. So, you know what? Anybody that wishes to be bitter, pretentious, and, not liking anything the MCU does now, that's your business. Entirely up to you. I will continue to enjoy what I do about each and every one of them. I will continue to keep my expectations set right where they've been from the beginning. I know what this franchise is. I enjoy it for what it is, and I don't wish for them to change a single thing. If you do, then I would say you would get more respect if you just admitted that they're not doing what you want them to do, instead of trying to call them wrong, and instead of trying to say that they're ruining things and they're destroying the franchise and they need to get back to their former glory. No, you need to reset your former glory. It is your subjective issue, not theirs. And certainly not the general audience's. Marvel Studios' job is to sell to the general audience. They've done that so far through the first 5 days of Brave New World's grossings. Whether you like it or not, whether you have issues with it or not, they're good. You need to look in the mirror, as far as I'm concerned. As always, you're welcome to agree or disagree with anything that I have said with respect to this, because, of course, it is all subjective, and I am just offering my opinion. So if you want to call it authoritative, you want to say I'm telling you how to feel or what to do, well, you can go ahead and join the long list of people who don't know what it's all subjective actually means, but I suspect most of you listening to this podcast know exactly what I mean, and whether you agree with me or not, you understand exactly where I'm coming from. And we can agree to disagree on this if you choose. I have absolutely no issues with that, just so long as you're not a dick about it. That's all. That's all I've ever said from the beginning. And it really is interesting to see all of this come full circle in this particular manner and see the evolution of this, being a long-suffering DCEU fan and going from those days where we had MCU gold standard beaten over our heads with respect to what DC wasn't doing that Marvel was, right? We heard that all the damn time. And now we're really in a position where not only is the MCU gold standard argument all but dead, but now we're curious as to what the DCU might bring going forward, as to what direction James Gunn and Peter Safran are going to start this franchise off on, right? Not with Creature Commandos. That was soft start. We're talking about with Superman on July 11th of this year. No doubt about it, right? We're curious. Cautiously optimistic, many of us are, myself included, as to what they're going to do. You know, the indications are that it won't be MCU 2.0, but we'll see. We'll see exactly how it goes. We've only got a couple of months, right? It'll be July before you know it, seriously. I know February is, we're still in the thick of it. We still got about a week and a half or so of this particular month left, and then we got to get through spring, and then we'll get into the middle of summer, right? So we've got some time, you know, for marketing and whatnot to do its thing. But this is where we're at. We're at a turning point, a crossroads, with respect to shared cinematic universes in the superhero genre. And only time will tell over the rest of this year, 2025, exactly where these franchises and superheroes in general as a genre are going to go. But for now, the general audience is doing all right. So you should be doing all right as well. But you don't have to. That is entirely your point. Because again, it is all subjective. And so I think that'll do it for this particular episode of the Flightcast, a conversational, look at the Marvel Cinematic Universe and the state of it currently, just having another one of those introspective discussions with respect to it. Thank you so much for listening to the show. Thank you so much for supporting the Flightcast. If you have any thoughts with respect to the state of the MCU, with respect to reaction to Captain America Brave New World, and where you think the franchise is headed, how you feel about any of what I have said, or anything that you wish to add and contribute to the discussion with respect to the Marvel Cinematic Universe and Marvel Studios in general, you know where to find me on Blue Sky at Flightcast. There's also the Flightcast Facebook page, and as always, I can be reached by email at ray@theflightcast.com. All right, take care, stay safe out there, and I will see you all next time. Take it easy.